Who says you can't claim a win on a bye week? And Rich Rodriguez and his staff, they haven't won too many games this year. They're not going to make a bowl game in year one of this Rich Rod WVU 2.0 tenure and the kickoff season. But they did pick up a victory this week despite it being a bye week as the Mountaineers successfully flip former Penn State commit and nationally rated offensive lineman Kevin Brown, who announces on the Pat McAfee show and then burns a couch. His father is a former Mountaineer who played under Rich Rod. He's a legacy. He was going to go to Penn State. James Franklin's firing led him away from the Nittany Lions and now led him to take those country roads to Morgantown. So here on this edition of Mountaineer Report, here made possible by West Virginia Sports Now, I'm Mike Asti. We'll be joined by Luke Blain. We are going to discuss everything and everything involving Kevin Brown committing to West Virginia, what Coach Rod even said also on the McAfee show after Kevin Brown was off the air and after he was done burning the couch. Couldn't talk literally about Kevin Brown, but, gave some answers that were alluding to Kevin Brown, of course. And then we're also going to touch on the hot start for both basketball programs, the men and the women. Men are winning. They have the brawl win. Now they're going to be tested, though, coming up into a tournament with some fellow Power 4 programs. Also, seems like Ross Hodge is annoyed by some commentary from the fans, and maybe not everything is positive for this Mountaineer men's team despite winning. And the women, they have one of the most miraculous victories ever. A Disney movie could be made off of their win at the Greenbrier. They lose a bunch of players. They win nonetheless. They do it after a fight. They overcome all odds. We wrote about it. We talked about it. Luke did a film review on it. And it became a national phenomenon and a story, and they do it over, at the time, a top 15 ranked team, over a solid program in Duke, in front of a small group of fans in West Virginia at a cool location at the Greenbrier, at that resort, and then now gets Mark Kellogg's team ranked also an unbeaten team, as well as they're going to maybe get close to more tests, but they have a big win that the men are still looking for. So, Luke, you were there on location for that one at the Greenbrier, of course, covering the men as well. And we all know what happened on the Pat McAfee show. We're going to start with Kevin Brown. But did you think this past week, a random week in November, off of a pretty poor football season, would become one of the best weeks for West Virginia sports of the year? And really, that's the case when you put it all together.
We were at the game. We were at the game. I was talking to some of the media guys. It was like, wait, and obviously this didn't happen, but I said, man, if WVU football goes out there and beats Arizona State tomorrow, is this one of the best, like, what craziest weeks? And of course, you do have to factor in men's soccer losing the Mountain State Derby. But man, there was the potential there for an all-time great week in WVU athletics.
Could have been more.
It definitely could have been more, but I still think it's pretty up there.
Right.
I think people are going to talk about that being the biggest win over Pitt in the Ross Hodge era, or in the backyard brawl era, being Ross Hodge's first win in
margin of victory
in that game.
I mean,
margin of victory, yeah,
literally the biggest margin of victory for West Virginia, and they have the edge significantly in the backyard brawl historically. So that tells you something to get a win that big in year one.
First year for Ross Hodge. And then the women's team, I mean, that's one of the greatest wins I've ever seen. I think everything that I can possibly say about it, I've said. Like it was just one of the most unbelievable demonstrations of just grit, resiliency, and just passion and just composure that I have ever witnessed, probably the most. And it was just, it was a very exciting atmosphere to be covering and be a part of. So that was a lot of fun.
They could literally
former Mountaineer Josiah Harris thought so too.
Yeah,
I mean, he was there.
I saw that. Yeah, I mean, it literally could be a movie. It could be a documentary someday.
Oh yeah,
and also to have it be this team. Everyone knows the Kellogg teams have been winning and been in the tournament and looking for that Sweet 16 berth the last couple years since he got to West Virginia. But those teams had JJ Quinterly. Those teams
Yeah.
had a NBA player. Those teams had stars and had more talent maybe on paper than this year's team. I think, honestly, if you look at the last 3 years and you were living under a rock and someone propelled you to the future and told you, close your eyes, pick a season in which they have a Disney movie like win and beat a top 15 team, and you're probably not going to pick this year's team off
Right.
just roster alone. And people even thinking that maybe this would be that team that maybe doesn't even make the tournament, but yet they're
Yeah.
getting wins. Sydney Shaw's playing well. She's kind of becoming that leader of the team. She's taking the mantle from JJ Quinterly, just like she did from Maddie Smith. So that succession plan continues to work. No matter who's coach for West Virginia, even if maybe you think like JJ was a role player initially and she became a star, and same thing happening for Sydney Shaw. But this team, maybe, and you alluded to this on our preview show, maybe a better overall group. And they kind of prove that by getting a win like this, because if Duke was in the same situation with their roster and 5 stars on their roster, maybe they wouldn't have pulled it off. Maybe other teams wouldn't have pulled it off. Maybe, South Carolina wouldn't have pulled it off. If you lose that many players and you're just emotionally scarred from the game over a team that's supposed to beat you, and then to still get the win, it's a big deal. And you almost got to make sure you don't have the emotional roller coaster and then dip down. We talked a lot with Ross Hodge after the brawl that you keep that even keel after that big win, because we've seen teams across sports throughout sports history have that high and then a crash down with a low. They didn't. They got a big win over Lafayette, even though a lesser opponent. We'll now see what the women's team does, and imagine they're going to keep on winning, of course. It's a great program that Mark Kellogg has put together, and a testament to him and his staff to have them be able to pull off a victory like that for sure. Luke Blain, Mike Asti here, Mountaineer Report, West Virginia Sports Now. All the coverage of all of that, Kevin Brown to all the basketball news and notes, all at WVSN. Of course, find us on social, and also find this show everywhere you get your podcasts and here on YouTube and throughout the network. Before we talk more basketball, though, we are going to jump into Kevin Brown. And I like you're saying with basketball, I probably have said everything already that needs to be said, on social media, written form, or on a myriad of shows, and everyone else has said the same. Obviously, a really big deal to get Kevin Brown. It kind of was the worst kept secret. Everyone knew this was happening, and really, if it was not going to be announced on the McAfee show, which is a gigantic deal for the program and a great way to do it, it probably would have been announced earlier, because he was locked in earlier. He was literally wearing gloves for his high school game. Like, he was locked in earlier. He waited until Sunday to decommit. But, our colleagues that cover Penn State, and even my sources there, they, I talked to even coaches that are there. They literally knew he wasn't coming weeks prior. Like, he really decommitted a while ago. And ends up at West Virginia, though. There is a legacy connection, but he wasn't always going to be a Mountaineer. And he also did, reveal some tidbits about maybe his lifelong fandom and when he came around and what happened under Holgerson and Neil Brown. And then also, even his father said that he didn't think he fit the Neil Brown offense. So they got the offer, but they didn't think he fit on the football field. And Neil Brown did churn NFL talent and offensive linemen with that system, even though they weren't great teams. But he didn't think that worked. He wanted him to be in a spread-like offense. That's what led him to Penn State, because with Drew Aller, they thought it was the closest thing they could get to the Rich Rod offense. And now they got Rich Rod back. So that led them again to take the country roads to Morgantown eventually. And kind of actually spurns Ohio State in the process. But that is the first top 50 national recruit for the West Virginia program since Noel Devine. There have been top players in their state. There have been 4 stars. Rodney Gallagher was a 4-star in PA, but he was nationally like 170 something off the top of my head. He certainly wasn't top 50. And there were some outlets that think Kevin Brown's more of a top 100. But 247 has him in the top 50, or they at least did during the announcement. So that counts. And the first one says Noah Devine. And of course, before that, they didn't really do recruiting ratings as much as they do now. And there have been great players and great teams since Noah Devine to now. So that includes prior to Neil Brown even. And yet this is that feather in the cap for the program right now. We will see what it does to the future. So just initially, your thoughts on getting a recruit to that level to commit in really Rich Rod's first full off season of being able to recruit, because he did get there in December. He did some recruiting. He did some mostly transfer recruiting in the portals in those 2 windows. But high school recruiting, he pretty much had to take Neil Brown's players on. This is his first run at high school players, first full year, and he hits a mammoth home run. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I really do think we are starting to see that Rich Rod's coaching style, if he can find his players that fit, it does work. He did have, that couple game stretch where they won games this season and they almost battled themselves and fought themselves back into position to be in a bowl game.
Yeah.
So I think that given a full off season of recruiting, I think that this team could be poised to take a step forward next year. And I especially think it's good that this commitment comes from a position group that definitely needs help. I
Yeah.
think out of all the position groups for the position groups of the whole team, I think the offensive line is probably the one that's been performing the worst this season. And Nico Marchiol was getting hit, so was Scotty Fox. It hasn't been a good situation for Fox to develop under because he does get hit. So I
Yeah.
think that there's going to be some turnover. There's going to be opportunities for new players, transfer players to come in. But in order to see those high level recruits, those top 50 recruits, look at Rich Rod and want to say, I want to go there. It doesn't matter if he yells and screams and coaches hard. It doesn't matter truly what maybe, I'm sure WVU probably put some money forward,
Oh,
but
yeah,
you'd
yeah,
have to imagine that
100%.
Ohio State would have offered him more.
You would
So I think
imagine.
in that situation, to see WVU come out on top in a recruiting battle like that, I think that's big.
And it does also feel like, and Rich has talked about this openly, that even though they need to have a certain amount of money to compete in general, and they all claim that it's kind of been rectified and what it wasn't there. So maybe this is proof in the pudding a little bit of that. Obviously, Kevin Brown isn't going to come for free, even if he wants the legacy connection and feels like he fits in the offense. They're not going to pay Ohio State money. But I think one takeaway is, and we don't have the official numbers, nor does anybody right now, because we're still in the middle of this season, for what's going to be there next year, of course. But it's obviously a good sign that there's more money. They wouldn't have had enough to do this last year or the year before. He's going to get a solid chunk of change. He's not coming for nothing. There's a level of what I kind of knew he was going to get at Penn State. Maybe it's not even to that number, but he got to get close, or I'm sure he's not coming. So, and they're not dumb enough to just give him all of it and have the rest of the offensive line be nothing. They know they need a group. So that's a positive that you can just read the tea leaves that, okay, there's something there. Now, to the other end of that, which maybe is part of kind of what we're saying, that he could have had more money elsewhere, but chose to just come to West Virginia for the fit. Rich Rod's talked about that he wants players that fit him. He really wants hard edge players. Some think that you can't get enough of them to win in this era and have them all be hard edge players, but he really feels like you can, and that great players still want to be coached up, and the hard edge thing can work in this era, certainly when there's also money behind it. And you have a player here who, yeah, I'm sure he likes having some money, but he has a legacy connection. He wants to get to the NFL. He wants to be at a place and develop there. He said on the McAfee show he's committing for 3 to 4 years. He didn't say I'm just committing in general. So you imagine he's going to be there for a hot minute. His body already looks like he's been in the Rich Rod weight room. I mean, he looks like he could be a Marvel superhero right now. And obviously he's going to get with Rich Rod and be more of that. And he wants to be in the right system. He's been training for Rich Rod's system through his dad for a while, which is why they didn't like Brown's system, liked Penn State's as it being closer. And now, obviously, Rich Rod's system is the perfect one for them. So you have a player here who fits what Rich Rod's looking for the most. He wants guys that love football and don't just like it to make some money. So if Kevin Brown just said, okay, I'll come, maybe I'll take a little bit less, but I still want a lot of money, it's all about the money for me, maybe they would even have said no. He fits everything. So the positive is you found that kid that fit everything, and now he can certainly help you get other recruits, can make the class better. Maybe other linemen would like to play for him because he'll cover up their mistakes. Certainly position players, quarterbacks, etc., are going to love to be behind this man because he'll certainly help them out in protection. That's been a rough go for this group this year. But the glass half empty take would be it's still a kid who has the NFL dream and is a legacy connection and maybe doesn't want to have all the most money but wants to be in the best situation. That doesn't mean that a kid who's the most talented, who maybe does care about the most money or isn't a legacy player, is going to still come. This might be, you could argue it's an isolated incident, I guess is what I'm saying. We have to see more of him doing this again and again to really know that this class is going to go from the traditional top 40, no matter who's the coach, even in the championship years, top 40s where it's been, to getting into a top 25, top 30 recruiting class and have it stay there beyond signing day into the next season. It usually fluctuates and goes off of it if WVU's there. If they can stay there, you're getting more than just Kevin Brown. So we'll see. It could be an isolated incident. It could be the perfect storm that unravels and starts the domino for his first recruiting class for real and makes year two great, and then onward and upward, and he's going to be there a while, and maybe they line up with him and Rich Rod's contract, and maybe you see a Big 12 title, and you point to this moment on the McAfee show and says this is where it started, and I think that's the dream Mountaineer fans have. But it could be an isolated incident. That is possible. So also, as part of the Kevin Brown phenomenon of the day, he set a couch on fire. He said that his grandma actually told him about that. And I guess I'll just ask, did you think that was cool? Was that a surprise for you? Do you think that would be something that could be, I guess, an issue, or you want to see after a win? Pat actually asked him, hey, the cops might not like this. And, he responded that they'll like it if we're winning and they'll be fine with it. And maybe that's true. But, I will say, even before my time, if you remember the beginning of all that, decades ago, that kids got expelled for doing it. Like,
oh, I had no idea they got expelled.
Way back in the day. I mean, you were basically just born, and this is even before I was a student. But I'm just that was more like the Kevin Pittsnoggle Elite 8 year, 20 years ago with Beeline there. That time frame, kids got expelled for it. So is it going to maybe be a problem that this Kevin Brown kind of appears like maybe you want to check in on him after a big win, that he might enjoy himself a little bit?
Yeah, well, I think that when it comes down to it, I think at the end of the day, Mountaineer fans want that feeling of Mountaineer football feeling like that again, right? And I think, we saw that. I mean, there were couches burned in Morgantown after that backyard brawl win.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
That absolutely happened. And you know what? Maybe the police will crack down more on it, but you know what? Maybe they won't. Maybe they'll see that and say, that's pretty cool. But
yeah, they'll be happy about the win too. They might look
sure.
the other way if the
might,
win happens too. They're
yeah,
fans too.
they might turn a blind eye every once in a
It's a
while,
college town. It's a college town.
exactly.
Again, that's the difference of WVU than say Pitt in a pro city. That there's a chance that a cop in Pittsburgh is not a Pitt fan. They might be a Penn State fan, WVU fan, or don't even care about college sports. The cop in Morgantown's a WVU fan. So, and that's just the case. So yeah, it was kind of an extra explanation point. I don't even think McAfee was expecting that. It kind of caught everybody by surprise, and it was definitely a cool part of it. Now, do you think the legacy part of it is part of them getting him, or do you think this is showing that Rich Rod's going to be able to pull these type of kids? What do you kind of take from this major recruiting win? Because while the legacy thing might be part of it, the system's part of it. He wants to play for Rich Rod. He was a legacy when he committed to Penn State initially. It's not like, he's been a legacy his whole life, and it didn't persuade him before. And you could make an argument that even with Rich Rod being the coach and now being the fit that Neil Brown was not for him, if James Franklin was not fired, he's probably not decommitting. He's probably still going there. And even if Rich Rod is the coach of West Virginia, they probably have to try again for him next year, but he's probably not coming as a freshman. So how much do you think the legacy thing weighed in?
Well, when you think about it, I think that Kevin Brown had an opportunity, I would say, and this is just an outsider theorizing, but probably had more time to get to know James Franklin, being a highly touted recruit from Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And, he probably had several visits over, or several
Harrisburg.
conversations with him over his recruitment. So Rich Rod comes in at the very end, doesn't really have that time to really set the foundation for a relationship like that going through the recruiting process. Now, fast forward to the firing, that flips everything on its head. right?
Yeah.
And there's an established relationship between his father and Rich Rod, him having coached him, So I think that for him being able to vouch for Rich Rod
Yeah.
and really help set that one up, it was definitely a favorable position. And who knows if he would be committed if he wasn't a legacy, type player. But I definitely think that, at least initially, I don't think Rich Rod would have stood much of a chance against James Franklin, of course, since he, got hired in December, right? So I think that's
Yeah.
it's kind of hard to tell how much of a part that played, but I doubt that his dad knew Ryan Day. Maybe they do, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you get recruited and get to know coaches, and Day's been there a while, but certainly doesn't know him as well as he knows Rich Rod, of course. Yeah,
Yeah,
100%. I mean, the kid could have waited because we kind of knew it was happening, and James Franklin admitted that he's been recruiting for Tech for a couple days. Like, that just was waiting to announce. I'm sure I know, and I'm sure he's been telling some recruits, like, hey, I'm going. Matt Sieg, for example, has heard from him. Maybe he could have waited for James Franklin and could have followed him to Virginia Tech. I mean, that's going to be an interesting part of all of this, that the recruiting base for a lot of these schools, West Virginia, Penn State, throw Pitt in, Virginia Tech, that, regional schools here that fans look at and what they're doing recruiting wise as rivals or the team they're a fan of in different conferences. James Franklin, Rich Rod, Pat Narduzzi, whoever Penn State hires, they're all going to be looking, similar geographic region for some of these same kids. So West Virginia's not done recruiting against James Franklin, even though, he's at Virginia Tech and not Penn State. He's still going to be a problem there. They're going to have a tougher time getting some of those Virginia kids that I imagine James Franklin's going to clean up on. And it's, I texted somebody, my first reaction, UVA is effed, was a
yeah,
text I sent somebody, because they have been better the last couple years in football, aside from 1 year with Heath Miller 15 years ago, former Steeler. They're not known for football. They're known for intelligence and maybe
yep.
basketball. They're going to have a tough time now because they've been getting some Virginia players. It's a hotbed there. Tech has not done well recruiting Virginia for a decade plus. That's part of the decline. James Franklin's going to fix all of that. He's going to get those kids. West Virginia's been getting some of those kids. He's going to get all those kids probably. So maybe Kevin Brown could have followed him, but if Franklin wasn't fired, you imagine he's still going to Penn State? Maybe not. Maybe he would. Maybe they would try for him next year in West Virginia, but you imagine this year he goes to Penn State still. But hey, the reality is Franklin got fired and Rich Rod swooped in and brought him over, and now he is a perfect fit. He was an absolute need. Do you think, though, that you can have the top player in somebody asked me this on a radio hit, and I'm going to pose it now to you because it was interesting, and then we'll get into the Neil Brown and Dana Holgerson of it all here before going to basketball. But do you think you can have the top player of a recruiting class that sets the tone as the leader of that recruiting class be a non-skilled player, a non-skilled position player, meaning an offensive lineman be that guy? Normally, at every program of any level, your top player of your class is usually a skill position type of player. Obviously, Noah Devine was the last player of this ilk. It's a great win. Kevin Brown's a great player. You do need to build offensive line, and then it'll help everything else. They can't have a bad O-line and expect any quarterback to have a chance. That's all true. It's not building a team wrong by any means. This is right. But do you need to see a position player, a skill position player also at that level to really then believe they're going to contend for championships? Or can they do it with great linemen, maybe another 4-star lineman or two, have the linemen get all the money, and then have Scotty Fox and whoever else take the reins, but be elevated because of the protection around them instead of having great skilled players who are making up for maybe other spots? Like Rich Rod had skilled players, obviously, in his first tenure. Are they going the opposite direction here?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting way to put it. I will say, if you're looking at it from an offensive standpoint, WVU's got some good skill position players already. It's not like
Yeah.
unless, everybody transfers. I mean, but you have to think that, Jakeem White is still there and he talks like he's going to come back. So imagine he's coming back and even 90% healthy.
Yeah.
he'll be just fine in the backfield. Ronnie Gallagher, assuming he'll still be there, Cam Vaughn, Grayson Barnes, things like
Yeah.
players like those guys. I think you do need to be able
The
to add
rumor of
some.
Jaden Bray even wants a medical red shirt, so maybe another year of Jaden Bray if he can get healthy. Yeah.
I mean, shoot, could be. I mean, it is unfortunate that we haven't been able to really see his full potential as a Mountaineer. I
Right.
mean, it's just a bad stroke of luck every time, every season for him. So, I mean, but you could really have, and that's not even just setting it from a talent perspective and a depth perspective, but also culture perspective. Having guys who have been there, who can buy in and lead and help establish that culture for those freshmen coming in, like Kevin Brown and anybody else that Rich Rod signs.
Right.
So I think that, like we said earlier, the O line is the main problem on offense. So if you get the players to help establish that O line and you can keep the wavelengths of the running back room, wide receiver room
Mm-hmm.
remotely stable and very and similars to this year, it'll be really interesting to see how it goes into next year because I do believe that there will be one starting quarterback to start the season, whether it be Scotty Fox or some veteran who comes in, unless I mean, if there was any
Yeah.
season to just mess around with the quarterback position, it was this one, right? Like expectations were fairly low nationally, and they were and your starting quarterback didn't fit the system quite right. You had two
Right.
freshmen back there. You had a couple veterans. So this was the year to mix and match. But you definitely need to have a firmer set foundation from the quarterback position next year as well. And based on what we've seen from Scotty Fox, I think there is a possibility that it's him. But like we've also said here, I do think that an upperclassman transfer could very much be in the picture.
I think that's likely the case. It doesn't have to be a major money guy. It doesn't have to be somebody that you're handing the rock to immediately. I would imagine that Rich Rod is going to have Scotty Fox compete with a veteran. Maybe Khalil Wilkins will still be around because he kind of was doing the Scotty Fox thing and emerging a little bit before he got hurt. So who knows? I imagine Scotty Fox certainly has an edge over Khalil Wilkins between those young guys. But there's been some freshman moments, and Rich Rod's couched all of his praise to Scotty Fox. Luke, if you really notice and listen closely, he always says he's playing well for a freshman, or he
Yeah.
makes mistakes like a freshman. Rich Rod says the word freshman all through talking about Scotty Fox, which that actually is a little of a negative for me. This guy wants to win championships, not just appease somebody or win 6 games. So I could see him thinking it's not enough right now unless he shows him more. There's only one more game left after this show, of course, or they don't have a bowl. They're not going to have the bowl practices. That's what sucks. Not so much making a bowl game for the 43rd or 44th for program history and that, ranking throughout the history of college football, but that it would have been nice to have those bowl practices for the team. He would have been able to see more from Scotty Fox, more from these young players, evaluate more. He could have these recruits kind of watch and let them know, especially if they already have signed on the dotted line, depending on when the bowl game is, because some could even be after signing day. So that's not going to be a thing now. The season ends and he's, kind of, you can text, I guess, but he's just going to have to wait on pins and needles and decide and see who decides to lock back in. And then who he wants to lock back in, because they got to evaluate too. And him and Zach Alley made it very clear that this week, while they got the recruiting win, they said the other part of business for this week is to do a lot of evaluations on who they even want to still be around. So they may sit down with some kids and say, we're going to look elsewhere. And it'll go both ways, as it always goes both ways. And they're playmakers here, but it's just interesting. I mean, Dave Weekly actually brought that up to me, and it kind of is interesting because it doesn't matter, I guess. I mean, if you have a top 50 offensive lineman that everybody in the country wanted and Ohio State was going after, that's obviously a great recruiting win. But yeah, you need skill position players too. But if they're not protected, it doesn't matter. And when you get protection, it can help everybody. So it can work hand in hand. And Cam Vaughn is another playmaker that should be around that's been a Rich Rod lifer. The only issue there, everyone wants him to get the ball more. I will tell you that Rich Rod's been asked by me and answered that there are things Cam Vaughn needs to work on that would also been nice to have during bowl practice. He's getting 5, 6, 7 targets in some of these games. He's only getting 1, 2, or 3 catches. And yeah, they're often for big plays and touchdowns, but Rich Rod claims he needs to work on route running. I don't know if the untrained eye sees that, but there are things the coaching staff still sees. They don't yet believe Cam Vaughn is a Big 12 number one true playmaking wide receiver. There's a reason why they don't just chuck it to him on every other play and hope for a PI or a reception. So there are playmakers there. There's talent there. They got to get more of it in order to really take that next step. What do you think this does, though, for the expectations of this next season? Because when you only have a 4-win year, obviously if they make a bowl game next year, have 7 wins, that should normally be a win. But I don't know if you also heard this, Luke. He literally said on the McAfee show, the same show after the Kevin Brown commitment, that if they are not talking college football playoff in November next year, he did something wrong. I think that was exactly what he said. He said a lot of things last offseason, and it didn't end up happening. The injuries and not being there long enough, all of that could be an excuse. Those excuses do not exist for next year and next season. Do you like hearing this from him again? And what would be a reasonable, solid season? You mentioned taking a step. Do they have to be in the CFP if they have a great recruiting class and Rich Rod's talking like this? Or can a 6-7 win year be good next season?
Well, I think in terms of the conference you're in the Big 12, it's it's way more open than a Big 10 or an SEC, right?
Yeah,
So
it is.
I think if you do, say you do have we'll just go from there. If you have a really good recruiting class, I think you should be in those talks in November. The only couple teams that I think that have been consistently very good in the NIL era are Texas Tech, and even from Texas Tech, it's a step down to BYU. And we know how much money that those two programs have coming in based on their donor bases. But for WVU, I think if they are able to get that big time recruiting class, if they have another full off season to let this team gel,
Yeah,
you already you're getting a culture established. That's why I think it's good that they've won a couple games this season and had
right.
especially mid season wins.
Yeah,
Those are huge because
yeah.
you saw the way the team interacted, you saw the way that they interacted with Rich Rod, and they had him dancing in the
Yeah, they're
locker
bought
room the
in
one day,
still.
and it's like
Right.
they are bought in.
Yeah.
So you're gonna have that buy-in again next year, and you're gonna have to go out there and win games in order to do that because there weren't really any splash signings for WVU this past offseason. I mean, unless you want to count Cam Vaughn and Fred Perry, but those are two guys who followed Rich Rod from
Yeah.
Jacksonville State. And
Right.
then I mean, you could say Robinson, but look how that one's turned out. It's definitely been,
Yeah, you had to
uh,
fight the NCAA. You got him
yes,
late. I mean, the hype might have been unfair to him. It was a good signing nationally, but you
yeah,
only got half a season with him, and then he didn't get to practice. Yeah.
yeah. So, I mean, so it feels like this is going to be more established because, let's think about it. At 1 year ago today, Rich Rod didn't have any recruits. He wasn't
Yeah.
hired. It was still Neil Brown
Yeah.
in Morgantown. So I think it's
Right.
really starting to put it into perspective just how much more time Rich Rod's going to have to go out there and try to contend for these players because, bringing in freshmen last year, it just it didn't work. You're not because all those freshmen, by the time December rolls around, are whittling down to their top 5, top 6, or whatever. So I think that that's what's important is giving Rich Rod time to get
Yeah.
to know these recruits, establish the culture of the team, and I think that that's gonna pay dividends in the long run.
100%. And Rich Rod's even been honest and talked about that, yeah, they got some players in last year's recruiting class. I know you didn't say this, but kind of tip your cap to Neil Brown a little bit for trying to help them keep some of those kids that he did
Yeah,
recruit. It could have been worse if he didn't do that. I mean, in all honesty. And then they got a lot of players in the portal, 2 portal windows. Now there's only going to be 1, but they got a lot of players. Some came in, they were like, hard edge isn't for me. They dipped out. Rich Rod evaluated and kicked out some of them. It was 80 new players really when you talk about high school to transfers in both windows. I mean, you can't do it. You can't sustain that way. There have been programs to win right away. Kirsten has won right away, going from a group of 5 to a power program, and a way worse historic program in Indiana, who literally has 2 10-win seasons in their entire program history of 130 years, and they're the 2 seasons with Kirk Cignetti. Prior to that, they only had 3 bowl wins in 120 some years, as insane as that sounds. Rich Rod himself has more than that for West Virginia lore. So You can do it though when you get either a major financial investment, they're putting in tons of money that West Virginia is not yet putting in, or you are able to bring in a lot of your players that are already great that fit you, and then you have more chemistry that comes in with you. He brought in 30 players from JMU. Rich Rod didn't bring in that many from Jack State. The JMU players were a different level than Jack State, and it wasn't 80 transfer players. It was 50 maybe for I think it was around that. That's a big difference. Like, you can't just live off 80 all the time. That's why he wants to develop guys from recruiting and then also sprinkle in some transfers. He's going to bring in transfers, but it doesn't mean that you can bring in 80 every year. Like, no one does that. Championship teams do not do that. Usually that's not successful. So this is the season for him, though. I'm not saying you got to go ahead and win the Big 12 in year 2, but he's talking like it. But there needs to be a giant step forward at minimum bowl game. And all the excuses of got there late, recruiting, money, injuries, unless they get more of those, they're not going to work at this point next year if you're sitting there with 4 or 5 wins again. Like, the pressure is on now more in year 2 than it even was in year 1. I don't want to hear anybody say, year 0 again, or that's really the real year 1. No, this is time now. He's in his 60s. You just get this major recruiting win, and as people in the chat are saying here, and it's true, you need more big fish. The coaches call Kevin Brown a big fish they landed. They got a big fish. You need more big fish to really get to that Texas Tech level. And you have to also imagine too, Luke, you may never spend to what Texas Tech is spending. I mean, they're spending an insane amount of money, and they got to get a championship out of it. They haven't really cashed in on all their money over the years, to be honest. But if you spend more and get to a certain level, Rich Ross talked about maybe 10 million instead of being at 3.5 with Neil Brown, or whatever it was this year. The reports of it not even being that much more and more around 4 or 5. If you can get to 6, 7, 8, certainly at 10, you're still half of where Tech is. But if you get there and you have a Hall of Fame coach that gets the right guys, develops his system, and his system does win when they fit his system, like some players maybe are better but didn't fit his system, but these kids do, then maybe you have a real shot. Luke Blain, Mike Asti here, Mountaineer Report, everywhere you get your podcasts, and of course throughout West Virginia sports. Now, before we fully move over to basketball and go from the gridiron to the hardwood, Kevin Brown also dropped some bombs. I don't know if this was breaking news really for anybody. People kind of knew these things if you've been paying attention over the years, but he did say that he went to visit as a legacy kid, probably 10, 11 years old. Dana Holgerson was the coach. They were actually ranked on a regular basis. That was after the Orange Bowl conference title, another 10-win season. I think fans do kind of slander his tenure. Wasn't Rich Rod's, but it was certainly solid. I mean, averaging 7, 8 wins a year, ranked most of the time. You had solid players, Tavon Austin, etc. But, kind of got the brush off. I don't want to talk to this legacy kid. Who the hell are you, skin and bones? You're a skinny offensive lineman. I'm laughing at you. Kind of, didn't give him the time of day, and didn't really probably in his think, he probably never thought, this kid's going to, eventually look like a superhero and come to Morgantown in years later. Like, he never thought that. But Dana Holgerson kind of brushed him off. And then even more recently, when this kid was more of a recruit and was more into form, he didn't necessarily say Neil Brown did this, even though he was the head coach, but that the offensive lineman under Neil Brown, who, by the way, that was Matt Moore, didn't want to look at his film when he showed up. These guys aren't the coach anymore. I kind of do roll my eyes when anyone really tries to bring them up now. It doesn't matter. I do talk to still some of the coaches under Neil Brown. Not Matt Moore. I'm not close with him at all. It's hard to imagine that would have been the case. They don't come off like a rude bunch, whether they want a kid or not. They're more respectful than even other coaches, whether they want or not for you. But what are your thoughts on Kevin Brown, number one, choosing to kind of bring up some dirty laundry from Dana Holgerson and Neil Brown and make it clear he didn't like those two coaches, which again is why he probably wouldn't be here if Brown was still the coach, and just anything else that kind of still stains those two legacies, good or bad?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely I I'm not going to blame him for bringing that up at all. I think that, especially being a young player who wants that opportunity, I
Yeah.
think he's totally justified to, if assuming what he said is true, I think I think he should feel totally justified in being able to kind of take that and say, "Hey, I'm here now.
Yeah.
Do with that what you will." I think that, I mean, honestly, it is a little bit of a good for him, really. I think that, it's real,
Yeah.
especially after hearing that, to be able to see him get that opportunity. I think that'll be a story that Mountaineer fans enjoy, and especially if he can work his way into a starting role next year. I think that this is going to be, and it's just kind of hard to imagine, like, saying, no to watching the tape on this kid or whatever it is.
That's
But,
what's hard to imagine. I mean, I totally
yeah,
believe Dana Holgerson brushed him off. I totally buy that.
yeah,
I definitely buy that. That was before your time as a student, of course, but I definitely buy that.
yeah.
Maybe Matt Moore did it. Here's what I'll say. I think that if it was a recruit they really thought was legit, or even any recruit they invited at all, just out of being respectful, Neil Brown, a really nice guy, even if obviously he wasn't, winning enough games to be the head coach of the Mountaineers, that if Neil Brown knew that a coach did that, Neil Brown probably would have been upset about it. Maybe Neil Brown didn't know. Maybe it's just Matt Moore that went rogue. Maybe Matt Moore was, in a bad mood that day. It's not excusing them, but it just does
All
seem out
right.
of character for Matt Moore and Neil Brown. Dana Holgerson, right on the money, 100%. Totally buy it. Totally buy it. I absolutely believe that occurred.
Yeah.
I mean, does it make you feel some type of way, though, about Holgerson? Of course, again, I buy that being his personality, or even the Neil Brown, Matt Moore situation. Do you buy that? I mean, I'm not accusing Kevin Brown of lying. I don't see his motivation to do that, but that does seem out of character from the Neil Brown staff, but not at all from the Holgerson staff.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I never sat in on any of Matt Moore's pressers or anything like that. I know he's a very good offensive line coach, and I know
Okay.
that
Yeah.
and I know that offensive line was a position that WVU was relatively steady at.
Yeah.
And, so I know that they went after
True.
a lot more skill position players later in the years, especially, like on defense and things of that nature. So I can't really, I can't. You have to think with the foundation, because I mean, even if the team was still together from last year, or if the transfers would have stayed, it probably would be a half decent O line, with Krahe and, others having gone
Yeah.
to Virginia Tech.
That's correct. Yeah.
So it does kind of sound like a bit of a shock to me, but, it makes me wonder just how much they were really looking at offensive line in the later parts of Neil Brown's tenure.
And I guess the defense would be kind of what you're saying, that the one assistant coach, and what's funny about this, if you remember, I'm old enough to remember this, and so are you, that even a year ago, when West Virginia was searching for the next group of coaches and the next head coach, there were many Mountaineer fans that wanted Matt Moore to stay.
Right.
Before him and Rich Rod went back and forth on X, and before he eventually went to Virginia Tech, and before the subtle, subtweet hard edge comment from Matt Moore, before that, like literally the week before that, a lot of the same people that turned on Matt Moore on a dime wanted him to stay. And the reason why they wanted him to stay, even though he was never really going to stay, because Rich Rod had his own guy, is because he was churning NFL talent. You can say Zach Frazier was going anyway, but Doug Nestor got NFL opportunity. I mean, he had a great unit. The offensive line was not the problem, really. They had bad moments, but for the most part, that O-line was fine and good. And you could say what you want about Neil Brown's play calling, the system, different players, Green regressing. The defense was awful last year. The offensive line was really not the biggest problem. They had NFL players there. Matt Moore seemed like a nice guy, seemed like a fine offensive line coach, fit that bill perfectly. That's why this seems a little bit odd. The only defense I guess I can even give is maybe to that end, Luke, maybe they thought, this is the one position we're fine at. We are churning NFL talent here. We know these guys are good. We got a maturation process here with Matt Moore on the offensive line. Who's this little legacy that at the time wasn't built up like he is now? That would have been a couple years ago. We don't need him. Maybe that kind of was, I mean, it's rude, but maybe they were like, this is, if he was a quarterback, a receiver, running back, maybe they would have, maybe they're like, we don't need to, I mean, we got Zach Frazier, Doug Nestor, like, we're good. We're not ready for you, you're not even going to be able to. You're not even been out of high school. At that point, they would have been in year 7 if they would have stayed. It would have been unlikely anyway. Maybe they thought, we're in year 4 of this, year 5 of this. We got a veteran bunch. I mean, that was also, to be fair, right around, I think, right before the Mayo Bowl year where they won 9. So going into that year, they might have thought the team was good. Like, it's still rude, and it was a future recruit and a legacy player, but maybe they just were like this, we're good on this offensive line. Like, we don't got time to watch your film. We need to correct other spots of this team. So maybe that was their thinking. Again, I don't know any of them as rude people, and I don't, from talking to some guys, I don't think they enjoyed that comment from Kevin Brown. But hey, if it happened to him, it happened to him, and more power to you to bring it up when you can, because he's now a Mountaineer and deserves to be that, and certainly could help lead the next era of Mountaineer football. But the cautionary tale is also what I just said too, Luke. We've seen great offensive lines lead average to bad teams. That happened under Neil Brown. So this is how you'll want to build. It's great to get a top 50 offensive lineman. Kevin Brown is a stud and a beast. You need more big fish. You need skill position players. You need to keep on doing this. You need to sprinkle in some portal and veteran guys. You do need to compete and figure out who really are those great players for next year with pressure. But if it's just great offensive linemen, that's not going to be enough. You can't do it you can't score the touchdowns on his own. So that is, Zach Frazier didn't, his best year was a Mayo Bowl year. He didn't win any conference titles. It does not guarantee the team wins just because you got one great offensive lineman. You imagine though more are coming, and Rich Rod's going to do a better job recruiting overall. You imagine. We will see if that keeps happening here. Mountaineer Report again. Luke Blain, Mike Asti here. Again, our coverage of Mountaineer football, but also now basketball, men's and women's, at West Virginia Sports Now, and of course also throughout the Mountaineer athletic and West Virginia sports scene. We're going to touch on the men first and then give some time to the women. And Luke again put out his first film room edition for the women, and it had to go to them because of the big win at the Greenbrier. And then we'll see what they do moving on, but they should keep winning, and kind of right now are proving some doubters wrong. But for the men, we've talked about this. You've written about this. What do you make of this team? I know you were high entering the season. They're winning. They're undefeated, but they're not even getting votes. They're not near getting votes for any ranking. Ken Palm wise, they're still kind of on the outside, or close. They're kind of on the inside, but outside of where you'd want to be. They're kind of a bubble team is what Ken Palm's saying right now, even though they're way better than prior to the Pitt game. And Pitt is not viewed nationally as anything special, so that's not even really a great win. They don't have that yet. And Eagle staff we've talked about and written about, he's kind of done nothing so far. You imagine he breaks out of that slump, but Chance Moore now returning. We haven't seen this team at full strength yet, but players that are there are not even performing, and yet they're winning anyway. You imagine they can't keep winning and into Big 12 play if Eagle staff keeps on not scoring and they keep having maybe these spurt. Like they haven't been perfect despite winning against lesser competition for the most part.
Say that last part again one more time.
Oh, I just said they haven't been perfect to this point. I mean, they've been winning.
I thought I was like, if you asked me a question, I missed it. I was about to say, but I think that, yeah.
I just was segueing into you. Go ahead.
Gotcha. Cool. Sorry.
You're good.
Sorry, I was just looking at the I
thought we froze. I thought you actually froze for a second. I saw you.
Oh, no.
Okay, because that's happened a few different times on different things.
Oh, okay.
I wouldn't have been surprised. But
yeah,
you're good.
I was looking over because I wanted to say, this team has an opportunity to really step into the forefront as a tournament team, or at the very least a bubble team this weekend. You're going to have, the one team that you're for certain going to play is Clemson, who is number 26 in the KenPom. That's what I was pulling up over there. That's why I was looking to the side. But I am very high on this team. We haven't even seen him at full strength. We're going to see Chance Moore for the first time this Friday. Jackson Fields, nobody, I should have asked about it, but nobody asked about him. Every time that they asked about him, I think the last one was after Pitt. Sounds like he's getting closer and closer, like inching toward being
Keenan
ready.
asked about that. Yeah.
So it'll be, I think there's a non-zero chance you could see this team at full strength on Friday. then you get your first real good look
You could.
versus your best competition that you've seen so far this season. I love the way that they've played defense. I think DJ Thomas has been one of the stories of the whole season, the way he has stepped up as a freshman.
Yep.
I mean, it kind of looked like maybe a bit of a top heavy team coming into the season, at least in terms of the starters, but there's been some bench players making plays. You have Amir Jenkins who can go in and run the offense. Like, he doesn't look like a freshman guard out there. He's confident. He goes out there and he makes plays. He makes some passes. He'll get some assists. DJ Thomas can rebound and put it right back in the bucket. But, they've been playing largely with an 8-man rotation. So you're going to be able to get some more depth here. You can probably keep some guys out for a little bit longer down the stretch because they don't have to
Yeah.
play as early. You can figure out your rotations a bit better. And it's not like Chance Moore is coming back from injury, right? He's coming back after having to serve well, I guess you could call it suspension, but just for the NCAA eligibility rules. So you're going to have him. He's fully healthy. Jackson Fields, we'll see how much he blends in whenever he does get to go out there. You'd have to imagine he'll kind of have to ease back into playing at full speed. I know Ross Hodge said he was doing that whenever he was coming back from injury, but you have those are two different pieces for both position groups with between guards and forwards that are bringing new things to the table that diversify the WVU offense. Jackson Fields being a very good shooting forward, standing at 6'8", and Chance Moore just being a downhill get to the rim scorer, who I've
Yeah.
said it before, I believe will be on Sports Center top 10 because I believe he will dunk on somebody and bring them out to crowd. He
Yeah.
tried multiple times during the game against Wheeling, just couldn't get him to connect. But man,
Yeah.
he just gets the ball and goes right to the rim. And, with this being such a downhill based offense for WVU, like I think the sky's the limit for this team. You've had so many different leading scorers, and, they've looked good, like you said, without Trayson Eaglestaff having a good night shooting yet. And I truly think that will come. And, I'm sure we'll get to that, but that I think some of the frustration from that kind of bubbled over for Ross Hodge after
Yeah.
the win against Lafayette, but he's out there and he's still making defensive plays. Like he is
That's
out there
true.
still running the offense.
100%.
He is,
Yeah.
yeah, he is absolutely still contributing to this team in a
Yeah.
positive way. And like Ross Hodge said, he's celebrating his teammates on the bench. He's playing hard defense. I do think we will see before the season's over one of those games where Trayson Eaglestaff has an Honor Huff like game, which will be scary once he maybe not to that level making 8 threes,
Yeah.
but a big scoring night. And on top of that, it is nice to see Honor Huff finally have that dominant shooting night, going 8 for 9. I
Yeah.
mean, it's just I don't know. This team hasn't even fully settled in, and Rossam said it. He was like, you only get so much time with the team. It could be that maybe we won't even reach our ceiling.
Well, yeah. I mean, you never know.
Yeah,
I mean, you
yeah, I was about
really
to say.
you never reach ceilings with any of these teams because it's almost a year-to-year business. But you only get so much time, and you imagine that you'd want your team to get better as the season progresses, hit into conference play. That's how teams win in March. So you get better. They're going to get healthier. They're going to get more to full strength. Maybe they're winning now without everybody being at their best, and they should get better. They have a coach who gets the most out of his guys. That is what you'd want as a fan for this team the rest of the year. And for an aside there, John Flowers, a member of the Final Four team in 2010 with Huggins, did bring up that Honor Huff was 2 3-pointers away from the program record. As amazing as those 8 3-pointers that I feel like has also gone under the radar. But the weirdest thing is, you mentioned Eaglestaff's eventually going to have an Honor Huff-like game. It was supposed to be that Honor Huff could dream of having an Eaglestaff-like game.
Yeah.
Because Eaglestaff's the one who scored 51 in a game last year. Eaglestaff's the one who hung 40 on Alabama, who was a damn good team last year. And to Ross Hodge's credit, and I do think he's kind of getting annoyed. Maybe he read some Facebook comments, even from our network, because he brought it up after Lafayette. You and many others texted me when I wasn't there, like, he's bringing this up off your question, and you're not even here. No one even asked this. And it feels like that maybe he's, maybe getting a little annoyed. But I will say what he said, to even expand on what you said, is true. Because he even brought up, to paraphrase, This is a kid who was a star at his last place. This is a different role now. He's trying to find his footing, but instead of pouting because his numbers aren't there, he's playing tough defense. He's being a great teammate, and he's celebrating others who are having great individual performances, and we're winning, which is the goal. The goal is to win, which was even the headline of your story. And when kids don't do that, and you have somebody who's a star who's not getting his individual numbers, we've seen this in sports, A.J. Brown is getting accused of this with the Eagles, for a national example. We're winning. Team just won a Super Bowl, and Eagles media and Eagle players are kind of throwing subtle jabs saying, like, what are you upset about? We're winning. You got a ring. And he's not happy because his individual numbers aren't necessarily where he wants them to be. And Hodge is trying to say, well, people criticize when an individual is mad when the team wins and he's not producing. This is a kid who's a great individual who's not producing, but we're winning and he's not complaining. So you're mad about that too? You can't win. These kids, damned if you do, damned if you don't. That's kind of what Hodge is saying, and I hear him there. The only issue is I'll say the same thing here that I've said on other shows when people ask me. The fans need to be reasonable. They need to give more time. I get all of that. What do you want to see out of somebody who's acting right, even if he's not producing? You want him to be a great teammate? Sure. The fans want to see the offensive player and the scorer and the shooter that you recruited and was hyped up. That's what they really want. I eventually imagine it will occur. The issue is, and this would be to play devil's advocate here, Luke, and maybe I'll pivot it to you with this. It's easier to get your feet wet when you're playing lesser competition, which is what's gone on to this point. Aside from the brawl, every other game was kind of a tune-up and was designed as that entering the season. When you're a shooter, and you should be able to translate that, but it is harder to fit in when you have other great players who are going to take shots. That's why you're not maybe being passive and not getting enough shots, whereas in North Dakota, he could just take 20-plus shots a game and score and do whatever he wanted. He was the only show there. That's all true. But it's now going to be more difficult, you'd imagine, to get shots against Clemson, against Georgia, Xavier, Ohio State, in the Big 12 play, on the road, tough matchups. It's only going to get harder to get shots off. They're not going to win by 30 in those games, even if they win. They're going to have tougher roads and scoring droughts, and it's going to be tougher. So if you can't get the shots off against Lafayette and Campbell, how are you going to get the shots off against Clemson and Ohio State? That would be the negative side of things. And then if you go too long where you're not taking shots and then you can't hit shots and you're scoring 2 or 3 points when you're supposed to score 30, do you then reduce his minutes? And then you really have a lost year. That is the glass half empty take here. Are you at all concerned that if he's having trouble getting shots off against lesser competition, he's only going to struggle more to get shots off against better competition? How do you fix this against better teams?
I think the answer right now is that the non-con still has plenty more games left, right?
Yeah, but
I think
tougher
that
opponents, though, even in the non-con.
true, tougher opponents, but I think that you're going to see an added layer of depth to the team. And I think the main question is, if WVU say they don't lose a game the entire regular season and Trace Eagle staff never scores double digits, will WVU fans still be mad? Because I mean,
I'm
it's
sure in that scenario. Yeah.
I think that
Right.
that's the thing right now, is because they've had different players step up and hit those big time shots, and they've been able to find the outside scoring. And the latest being DJ Thomas and Honor Huff with both 20
Yeah.
points in the past game. So I mean, that's the thing with this team, is they're winning in different ways.
Yeah.
Last year, if Javon Small doesn't have like a 15 plus point, 20-point performance, WVU is probably going to lose.
No shot.
But
Yeah.
and we still haven't seen this team at full strength. So, and I haven't there hasn't been an offensive showing yet to me. I mean, maybe shoot, what was it, Campbell? I mean, there was one game where it was probably a little bit closer than you would have liked it to be, but that
That
was
was the
also
game.
from
Yeah.
just yeah,
Sure.
that was also just a general poor performance from the offense as well. I
Yeah.
think that Trace and Eagle staff will get his reps. I think he will get his shots up, but even at that, the team's playing fine right now. Like Hodge
They
said,
are. No, they are. Yeah.
they're winning, and that's what's most important.
I think the concern is that you're 5-0 right now going into the Clemson game and going into that tournament. But you're not obviously going to win all the games, and it's unlikely that you're going to win enough of the games against better competition, again, Ohio State, Clemson, and then into Big 12 play and do enough to be a tournament team. That's, I think, what the fans are worried about. Are you going to be able to sustain this and win enough without supposedly your top player doing anything? Because so far this year, the Campbell game you mentioned is his only double-digit scoring performance. He had 12 in that game, which actually was too close for comfort. They only won 73-65. That's where their Ken Palm cratered out, despite him actually scoring. Otherwise, literally 1 point in the debut, 5 Lehigh, 3 in the brawl off of 1 3-pointer, so 1 shot hits that, and then 4 points against Lafayette. And his shot selection, he had 14 when he scored 12, but otherwise it's 3, 5, 6, and 4. I've said this. I need more shots from him. I'd rather him go 2 for 10 than 0 for 3 or 4. I need more shots from a shooter. And when he shot it more, it wasn't a great percentage. He was only at 35.7 against Campbell, Luke. It's 5 for 14. But he got 12 points. So if he gets 12 points a night, even if it's 35%, that's enough on this team with so much else on the squad, even if it wouldn't have been enough at North Dakota. But he's not doing that. And I don't want to make this whole show on just Eagle staff, but it stands out. And I think the concern is, can they keep this up without him? Yeah, if they get to 75 points, that's a bar they feel like they're going to win most nights because their defense, they're getting there anyway. Can they keep getting there, and can they get there in Big 12 play if they don't really have much from Eagle staff, who's averaging 5 points a game, which is insane, and that's a little inflated from the Campbell game. You take that out, he's averaging less. So he got to take more shots and find his footing there. But, yeah, you're getting more than maybe you would have thought out of Brennan Lorient, out of Honor Huff, DJ Thomas, of course, Harlan Obioha. I mean, he dominated the Pitt game and almost won it by himself with his size. There's more size on this team than DeVries' team, Eiler's team, or even the end of Huggins. That's a big deal. That can help you in Big 12 play. They are mirroring Houston in that way, winning on defense and with size. So they need the shooters. They need the outside shooters. Teams are trying to scheme against Eagle staff too, which I know Hodge has also brought up. It was funny that he brought it up when it was unprompted. I think he's getting frustrated too with some of the fan reaction. And even to answer Curtis here in our chat, because we're doing live before this is, going to be podcasted. Chance Moore's obviously playing on Friday. That's definitely occurring, barring some unforeseen, but he certainly should be playing. And then Jackson Fields, it's not confirmed. He maybe will, but Hodge did mention he wants him at literally 110 to 120% of full go before he plays him. That was basically what he said after the brawl, meaning if he's just ready to go, but he's not extra ready, maybe he holds him out again. And maybe because they're winning without him, he doesn't have to force him in the lineup. I wouldn't be surprised if he still doesn't play on Friday, but Chance Moore definitely should play. And will that make it tough for an Eagle staff to get involved? Will it eventually unlock him? That is something to keep an eye on. Or does it take away from somebody else? If we see 20 from Eagle staff, does Honor Huff go from, having his big 25er to an 8-point showing? And then you don't want that either. They got to find a way to play together, and you got to do it now before Big 12 play, and then we'll have those conversations then if we're still seeing this same type of struggles and same type of production, what you got to do minute-wise. I do want to touch on the women's team, though. Luke Blain, Mike Asti, Mountaineer Report here, West Virginia Sports Now. You were there at the Greenbrier. You did a film review. You wrote about it. I mean, it was miraculous. We talked about it at the top of the program. It could be a Disney movie. National media soaked it up all in. You lose players from a fight. You're probably mad they shouldn't have got into a scrum, and you know that whole thing probably annoys you as a coach. You're probably talking about that to the team, but you win anyway. You persevere anyway. You call them the Greenbrier 5. They're going to go on Mountaineer lore just for that incredible victory. Because of that win, you get a ranked win. You beat Duke. You're now in the top 25. You're getting the love that you want to get. You did it. National media loves you now. But you know what this means, Luke? Those national media members that love the Greenbrier 5, they're going to check in more now. They know what's been going on the last couple of years. They're going to check in more now. Now there's more pressure to keep on doing this and not lay an egg and ruin the momentum from that Duke win. So now with that win under your belt, still knowing the strengths and weaknesses of this roster, what now are the expectations of this team? Have they changed at all from the win over Duke? And how do you see them moving on from that emotional high? Because it could go one of two ways, and it should go in one direction. But again, they don't have a WNBA player to just carry them if they would have a rough night. Where do you see this team going from here, and what are the expectations now after the Greenbrier 5 win over Duke.
Well, I think the thing is, I think there was a healthy mix in that last game of WVU absolutely making the plays to win the game, and I don't want to try to diminish that at all in the next statement, but there was a whole lot of Duke losing it too. I think that, I would definitely say that WVU made, I would put it at a good, let me say 75-25. I think Duke had some opportunities, and I flat out think that Duke was outcoached by Mark Kellogg. Like, it was very impressive what he did against the
Yeah.
coach who has been selected to lead the U.S. women's
Yeah,
national team. That's
right.
been the talk
Right.
of the whole. That's
Right.
been the talk of the whole few days since that, where it's like, really,
Oh,
like,
Kellogg's an underrated coach. He's an underrated coach in
I
America.
absolutely agree. I think
Yeah.
that he's
Yeah.
been able to steadily put this team in positions to win, and they take advantage of it. I think whenever looking at the rest of the women's team schedule, you have to go into conference play undefeated. I think that's the expectation now. Looking down the line, there's no teams that I look at and say, I don't know if WVU can beat them. I
Yeah.
think you have Texas A&M, who they handled last year. Georgia Tech isn't doing tremendous this year. Villanova, they'll probably see Ohio State in the Bahamas, if you had to guess, based on, the strength of competition there. But you're going to have to find ways to win in the Big 12.
Yeah.
I think that's been the main problem for this team. They've had games in seasons prior where they didn't win like they should have against certain teams. I mean, the first game, Colorado comes to mind. They dropped that one. Colorado's not a team that the Mountaineers should be
Yeah, I
losing
remember
to.
that. Yeah.
So that was a bad one. So, but you have these teams. You have Iowa State, who has Audie Crooks, one of the best players in the country. TCU's still having a great year. There's still plenty other teams that we have yet to see how it's going to
Yeah.
shake out there. But you have to
Big
contend
12
this year in the
stack.
Big 12, I think. You have to be able to rebound. You have to be able, I think CC Riviere earned a ton more minutes, and she's a good 6'3", and I think that probably the tallest on the team right now. So just seeing that you can trust her to go in there and play, I think that's huge because she really has been more of a reserve role for this team.
Yeah.
But she played the full 20 minutes in the second half and dominated down low, and it opened things up, like I talked about in the film review, for other players. And that's just the problem, is that WVU hasn't had that dominating inside presence. Kylie Blackson was good and she served her role well, but she wasn't a player that you looked at on the scout and were like, we have to double team her whenever she gets the ball in the post. She actually honestly shot it better than she did score it inside. But
Yeah.
if you can get Riviere going in that role, because that's what every other Big 12 team does. You've had these dominant bigs. You've had Sedona Prince, uh, Aoka Lee from Kansas State, who they require so much attention
Yeah.
that it opens
That's the
up
thing.
other players, like last year, Haley Van Lith for TCU.
Yeah.
So that's what WVU has been lacking the past few seasons. But if you can have Riviere step up into that role, become that specified position, because she hit some tough shots. They were not, by all means, like, most of her shots were not easy shots in that Duke game.
Yeah.
So I think that you just have to find a way to develop around that, keep putting the team in positions to win, because that's just the problem. Is, there were specific matchups the past few years in the Big 12 where it's, oh, if they have a dominant big, then WVU's in trouble.
Right,
And
because they
that's
had
just
great
the way it worked
players.
out.
Quinterly was a great player. Maddie Smith again
Yes.
before Kellogg was a great player, but they weren't bigs. They weren't giving you that
Right.
size by themselves to be that magnetic command double coverage.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll have that now. Like that piece is maybe what you need to get to that Sweet 16 level, which they've clearly said is now the bar for the program. You've done the tournament thing. You've won a tournament game. You've gone toe to toe with Caitlin Clark and North Carolina, and your losses are good ones. But getting that Sweet 16 bar and getting a better seat. I mean, Luke, I think what this really does now is there's an expectation now that you have a major staple win. You have national attention. You are now ranked. If you keep taking care of business, last year, the conversation going to Big 12 play, and even really the last couple of years was more so last year, there wasn't really the big time win on the resume. And that's what eventually hurt you seed-wise. It even hurt you the Caitlin Clark year seed-wise, even, and maybe you could argue they got screwed out of that year. That cannot be said now, because there is one. The only way that could be said is if Duke totally collapses and has a horrible year, but it's a Duke program that should eventually get enough wins so that won't be a bad win for you. Meaning that you should be able to have a better seed line. There's what the opportunity now is having a chance at a seed line, even at the level of anywhere from 4 to 6, certainly a 4, a 5, hosting maybe an NCAA tournament game, which is what Mark Kellogg said at the Pittsburgh Caravan event that I attended. That's his real goal before worrying about tournament games, is hosting one. It's on the board now if they win enough, because they have the staple win, and then you also have to get some in Big 12 play. And even if you don't host, getting at least a smidget better of a seed line than where you've been 8 or 9, get to a 6 or something. Like that could help you get one more matchup that's more favorable to you in the NCAA tournament, because you could argue on the women's side of things, the matchups and the seed line matter way more. Aside from even who hosts and who doesn't host, you're going to get a real rough road. If you're an 8 or 9, you're going to be facing off the 1 quick, etc. It's going to be hard. And even if that would be the similar matchup seed one in the men's, we've seen 8 or 9 beat a 1 a lot. Like that can happen. These teams are closer on the men's side, whereas on the women's side, the talent differential is usually further from a 1 to an 8, 9, or a 10 seed. But West Virginia put up solid fights against Caitlin Clark and against North Carolina. But maybe now up the side, maybe more of an overall team, even if not a WNBA player. Maybe now Mark Kellogg's been through the fire a couple years at this program. That maybe now they're more battle tested and more ready, and now they have the Duke win that no one can deny on their resume and getting that seed line. If they can you? And I know it's women's and not men's, but can you imagine if West Virginia is hosting an NCAA tournament game?
That'd be huge.
That would be the probably the biggest crowd you ever see for women's basketball in Morgantown ever. They would probably have that record.
It would be one of
100%.
With the defensive mindset as well. It's going to be one of the hardest positions to play in. I would imagine the stadium would be close to full. I mean,
yeah, I think the fans would show up. I think they would show up,
especially the way. I mean, that's the thing with the Coliseum being such a big venue. It is hard to fill. Like it is bigger than most college arenas in the country.
Sure.
But so coming into it, you're coming into a hostile environment. I think fans are really starting to buy into this team earlier than they have the past couple years because of a statement win so early in the schedule, which I think was a smart scheduling move.
It's easy to say that now. I mean, it's easy to say it now. If they would have,
for sure.
They would have lost. Yeah. It was a risk. It was a gamble, but they got the win. Yeah.
You are running that risk, and the men's team is running that same risk as well, hosting Wake Forest and Charleston, and 100%. You have it on a neutral floor, but it's it's in the state of West Virginia. It's going to be 95% WVU fans.
Sure.
But to your point as well, if this team, I mean, I think this is the correct stat. No, since the women's tournament has moved to 64 teams, nobody lower than a 3rd seed has won it. Like nobody lower than a 3rd seed has won the whole thing. The talent is dispersed there, so it is very important for them. That's why with these lower seeds in the past years, that they haven't really gotten those favorable matchups. UNC was another example of one of those teams that had a ton of height that WVU couldn't rebound against. They couldn't really make the shots, and then they ended up losing that one. But if you can end up as a 3 or a 4 seed and host 2 games in Morgantown, you can carry some serious momentum into the Sweet 16. Because I don't think that WVU would get upset. Like I don't think that there's the depth of talent or the disbursement. I guess that's a word. I don't know. The dispersing of talent.
There you go.
At the women's level yet. For WVU to really be on upset watch.
And it would be a great home court advantage. It would, especially with a defensive-minded team. I think again, everyone even know. I mean, this is not an insult by any means. Obviously, a program like West Virginia, the fan base is probably always going to care more about the men's team than the women's team. That's just the case. There's a lot more history behind the men's team. Jerry West, Bob Huggins. You got Final Fours. You got a banner that does say national champs, even though it's a long damn time ago. Like that, we're looking for a Sweet 16 bars for the first time since '92 for the women's team. It's a different level. You're not at the men's team's history. And then you got, get into the men's versus women's debate here. I mean, just the men's team is going to garner more attention. But if the women are hosting an NCAA tournament game, this whole fan base would support it 100%. They 100% would support it. They would want to produce for that team what they've gone up against, because Mark Kellogg has pretty much hinted at this, and it's basically the case. Certainly from the Caitlin Clark game, maybe more so than North Carolina, where they were really going to just kind of maybe lose anyway. But in the women's game, more than even the men, you get favorable calls when you're hosting. You do. You imagine they would then get those favorable calls in their favor. And yeah, they're going to always go to their graves believing that they kind of got jobbed out of some calls against Caitlin Clark in Iowa. And obviously
I was about to say, not that that's ever happened against WVU.
Right. I mean, obviously that year, that no matter whether you played on the Moon or Iowa or West Virginia, clearly the media wanted to get Caitlin Clark as far as she could in that year. I mean, she was carrying the sport okay. But still, if that was in Morgantown, maybe the calls go the other way. If you're hosting, that can be a big advantage for you on the floor, in the ref's mind, with the fans, everything. And now it's on. I'm not saying it's a guarantee it's going to happen. They could lose Big 12 games, but it's on the board now with a top 15 win on their resume, and you keep on winning and move up the rankings, and then you clip off someone Big 12 play. At minimum, if you get a solid C line and can freaking host, you're looking at a Sweet 16 appearance, would be an incredible lift and bar for this program, no matter who's been the coach. It's really get in, and then that's it. They're vocally saying Sweet 16 or bust, even without a WNBA player. Now it's on the board with the Duke win. Whereas if you lost the Duke game and even were close with them, the committee would still be saying we got to get a big win here. They got one now, so now it's just don't mess it up and then get some in Big 12 play. But as you mentioned, to get all that to be the case, you probably do need to go unscathed and go undefeated until you get into conference play. And then, of course, you're going to lose some of those games, but you can't lose too many of them, and you got to get some big wins. But you can't be dropping games to teams that you're favored to beat. That would be how you'd get killed on KenPom, move out of the rankings despite winning, and the Duke win would go away. But now it's all on the board for this team in front of them. That'll do it for this edition of the show. A lot to discuss. A lot's been going on. A lot of winning for Mountaineer sports, even though some teams haven't had the best of years, and maybe more winning off the field in recruiting than even on it, but big wins on it as well. Certainly on the basketball side of things. Check in with all of our coverage at West Virginia Sports Now and find every episode of Mountaineer Report everywhere you get your podcasts, and of course throughout the West Virginia Sports Now network.